All right, good afternoon, everybody. So we're going to go ahead and kick it off. I'm going to share my screen and we're going to get into today's awesome topics. So welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. We are really excited to have everyone in the Zoom room today. Before we get started, we have a few housekeeping things just to make sure that everybody is able to access information and kind of engage in the way that is best for you. So to do that, we're going to encourage you to, if you need, go ahead and use the closed captioning. So you can click Show Captions down in the bottom of your Zoom bar to see those closed captions, and click on that icon to chat. You can also use, we have a Zoom guide in case you need keyboard shortcuts for assistive technology. One of my colleagues will drop that in the chat. We also have slides and resources available for folks. I know some of us, it's easier to process afterwards and kind of soak in all the information. So you can find the slides and resources available on Public Advocate's website. We'll drop a link to that in the chat as well. And finally, today we hope is a really rich conversation, and we're going to be sharing a lot of information, and our panelists are going to really have a deep conversation, but we know that this is not one and done work, and the learning should continue, and we want the conversations to continue. So we're also offering one-on-one sessions after today's webinar for anyone who wants additional support on any of the topics that are covered today. So if something makes a light bulb go off for you and you want to dig deeper, then that's what we're here for. So I like to think of these virtual spaces as communities just as much as kind of physical spaces can be. So we'd like to make sure we know who we're in community with today, who's in the Zoom room. To do that in the chat, please go ahead and type in your name, your pronouns, your role, and the city or school district that you're coming from, so we know where folks are and where they're coming from. Give folks a moment to go ahead and start doing that. All right, and as folks go ahead and introduce themselves, I will introduce myself and then I will introduce our topic and get us started. So my name is Melissa Valenzuela-Stuckey. I am the Director of P16 Research at the Education Trust West, and I'm really just kicking us off today so that I can hand it over to our experts in educator diversity to have a really rich conversation. That is our topic today. Hopefully, when you're getting on a flight, they ask you if you know where you're going to make sure you're on the right plane. Hopefully you signed on today because you are ready to take this journey in conversation around diversifying our educator workforce in California. We're going to talk today about the challenges that the state currently faces in making sure that our students see themselves reflected, see their rich diversity reflected at the front of their classrooms, and the opportunities that state leaders, local leaders can kind of take advantage of to make that a reality. So in order to kind of understand, what we want to get out of this conversation, we put together some outcomes that we're hoping for. What does success look like coming out of today's webinar? Really, we're thinking of three things on that point. The first is that this will be a success if we have a chance as a group to share findings around teacher diversity based on data. So we really don't want to be purely basing this conversation on, anecdotes. We want it to be grounded in evidence about what's happening in the field. And it's important, I think, for us to note that that data can be both qualitative. So what are folks saying? What are we hearing from teachers and educators and educator prep programs, and quantitative data, so hard numbers. Second, we want to understand state policy ideas to improve educator preparation and diversity, both in the long and short term. So what can we do right now to make a change? And what can we do to make sure that we are making a sustainable shift in our educator workforce? Finally, today will be a success if all of us walk out of this Zoom conversation understanding some key learning opportunities and knowing how we can plug in to work towards this goal in the future. So that's a lot. That's an ambitious agenda for the time that we have together, but I have faith that we can do it. We definitely, oops, sorry guys, I want to make sure that you are all seeing all of this good stuff. Thanks for bearing with me as I work through the tech. All right. So I just took us through our outcomes. Sorry for those of you who are visual learners. I'm going to give you a second to read through. And as we work towards these outcomes today, we've put together a really interactive kind of agenda to make sure that you get to hear, like I said, from the experts, and then you get to engage and ask whatever questions you're coming to this conversation with today as well. So that being said, we're going to start off with a quick recap to understand where have we been so far. For those of you who've been plugging in over the last several months, the last year actually, you know that this is kind of a learning network, a journey that we're going on together on this theme. So it's not one and done. And so we're going to give you a quick reminder of the conversations we've had so far. Then we're going to get into a state policy roundtable with our experts. They're going to talk about three main themes. First, using data to illustrate the teacher shortage. Then, creating more pathways into teaching. How can we actually work together to make that a reality? And finally, what can the state do from a policy perspective to create a diverse and high quality workforce? What are those levers that those state actors can and should be pulling? Like I said, then we turn from us having a conversation to everybody getting to weigh in and ask questions. We're going to have a couple ways to submit those questions. A lot of you gave us really great questions before the webinar started, and we'll also have the opportunity to share questions in the chat or Q&A. We're not going to be able to get to everyone's questions, but like I said earlier, there's always an opportunity to follow up and dig deeper if we don't have a chance to get to a burning question that you have today. And finally, we'll point out some key learning opportunities coming up in the next few months that you guys can plug into. All right, so I think in life, it's important to understand where we've been to know where we are going and where we should be going. Same is true for this webinar series for our learning network. So last spring, if you can cast your minds back that far, we had the first installment of this learning series focused on really teacher preparation and quality. So how can you use data, especially data on teacher assignments? We shorthand that as the TAMO data, to understand teacher preparation in your local community. The second webinar that we had was in the fall, and it focused on digging even deeper into that data. We have a really cool data tool that we're going to drop a link to in the chat as well. And that conversation focused on how can that data be something that really grounds conversations that we can use to make sense of gaps in access to high quality teachers, in access to fully prepared teachers, so that we can make a difference in closing those gaps for our students. That brings us to today. We know that there are kind of two really important ingredients in a high quality and diverse teacher workforce. One is that full preparedness piece, and the second is diversity. That's what's going to be kind of our biggest focus today. So we're going to focus on understanding shortages of diverse teachers and potential solutions. I mentioned that TAMO data. I just want to give folks a heads up that this is a really important data release, and it's going to be the third time that the state publishes this information this fall. You can access that information hopefully starting in June. And like I said, we have a link to the kind of previous year's worth of data and a data tool that should help you explore that in a really accessible way. All right. So getting into the meat of things. The first thing before we get kind of into the abstract state level stuff, I think it's really important for us to pause and think about what it meant in our own lives to have a teacher of color and how that impacted your learning experience. Now, I know it's also important to think about a lot of folks have never had a teacher who looks like them, or it wasn't until college that they had a teacher who reflected the diversity of their own communities. So let's think about that question. How did having or not having a teacher of color impact your learning experience? And what we're going to do, since we're a decently large group, is kind of do a virtual pair and share. So we're going to pop you into a breakout room with a partner, and you're going to talk about your reflection on this question with them just for a couple minutes, and then we'll bring everyone back to the big room.
Great. Well, now that we've had a moment to mingle and meet, I'll introduce myself. My name is Angelica Salazar, or Angie, or Angelica. I'm a senior policy advocate at Public Advocates. I'm very happy to be here today. It's my privilege to moderate our policy roundtable. And again, just a reminder to select your language preference, and then also, if you can, go back onto mute so that we can make sure we hear each other. Okay, so again, we're here today to talk about state-level solutions to our shortage of fully prepared teachers, and specifically teachers of color and multilingual teachers. I want to start with some framing. And many of you might have read or have seen about a year ago this time, Education Trust West, Californians for Justice, and Public Advocates published the California Educator Diversity Roadmap. And this roadmap is really unique because it's informed by community. We talked to about 132 educators, administrators, students, and community leaders. And we talked about a set of key recommendations that would support and strengthen a diverse educator pipeline. So it's part of a lot of the recommendations we're going to talk about today are going to be connected to this framework. Specifically, the roadmap had 6 key recommendations. We're going to talk about the 4 that are on the left side of the screen today more in detail. Those recommendations start with tracking and reporting educator diversity data. So there, the questions we ask are, how does the publicly accessible data, how does it reveal to us what is the racial and ethnic representation of our teacher workforce? How could our data sources be improved to inform our goals and our progress toward ensuring that our diverse students have teachers who they can relate to and who they can identify with? We're also going to talk about educator pathways in high schools and community colleges, which was a key recommendation to build those out. How do we start recruiting and supporting teacher candidates of color early in their post-secondary education trajectories? How can the state support our higher education system to train the next generation of teachers? We're also going to talk about educator compensation. Recently, a member of the Commission on Teacher Credentialing said that teaching is one of the most honorable professions and one that influences all other professions in the long term. Yet we know that it's often a profession that hasn't been uplifted in the way that it should, and that also has to do with compensation. So how can we improve how we compensate our teachers, and what's the state's role? And then in our policy roundtable, we'll be talking throughout about support for diverse educator candidates, as that's a big theme today. The 2 on the right, a safer and more inclusive school climate, and community engagement in the educator feedback and hiring processes. Those are recommendations that fall more under the purview of local school district. And so we'll be excited to cover those at our next webinar this fall. Okay. Also, I encourage you, maybe if someone on our team could drop the link to the Educator Diversity Roadmap in the chat. I encourage you all to look at that as you're continuing on your learning journey with us on this. So now let's talk about our panel. First, I'm going to explain the format. So we have 3 amazing panelists today. They'll each have 10 minutes to present. During these presentations, if you have any questions, we encourage you to type those in the chat. If it's a clarifying question, one of our moderators will be doing their best to respond if it's a clarifying question. If it's more of a discussion question, we're going to save it to the end when we have our Q&A. We will start that Q&A after each presenter has finished their presentation. We're hoping to have at least 20 minutes for the Q&A. And we are actually going to be using questions that you all gave us when you registered for this webinar. So thanks to all of those of you who came curious and shared those questions in advance. After a brief time of conversation that I'll moderate based on those questions, we'll open it up to the audience. The process will be to raise your hand, and once I call on you, you can go off mute and you can state your question. So we'll be going back and forth between questions that we got in the chat throughout this the presentations, and also any direct questions that you want to make. Okay, well, with that, it is my pleasure to start my introduction of my colleagues. So first, we have Krista Capuzza, Research and Data Analyst at the Education Trust West. Krista has known the power and value of education from a young age, thanks to the work of her first educators, her parents, who are immigrants from India. Krista was an English and English language development teacher in West Contra Costa Unified, where she started advocating for education equity. Not only is Krista a data expert, she is also an avid reader, consuming up to 20 books a year, which is literally and statistically significant. Krista is also the creator of the TAMO data dashboard that we shared earlier in the chat that we presented at our last webinar. And this has made it possible for us to dig deeper into the data on teacher preparation and equity. Today, Krista will be illustrating the teacher shortage with data. Next, we have Kai Matthews, Director of the California Educator Diversity Project at UCLA Center for the Transformation of Schools. Kai is also a former teacher. She taught 8th grade at High Tech High in San Diego. When she left the classroom, her students gifted her a creation from wood shop with engravings of adjectives that described her. There were many, and one that stood out was the word real. She continues to foster authentic, inquisitive, and healing spaces for students, researchers, and advocates and educators to work collectively to diversify and humanize the educator pipeline through liberatory design and social justice education. On Friday nights, you can find Kai roller skating at the local SoCal beaches, and Kai will be presenting on creating more pathways to teaching. And last but never least is John Affelt, Managing Director of the Education Equity Team at Public Advocates. For over 30 years, John has been fulfilling his childhood dream of being a phenomenal education equity attorney. He's brought multiple lawsuits to hold states and districts accountable for providing fully credentialed teachers for low-income students and students of color, and continues to work to reform discriminatory barriers to the teaching profession. When John is not advocating for equitable funding, John enjoys fly fishing, traveling, and traveling to go fly fishing, which has also resulted in some of the best Zoom backgrounds from the pictures that he's taken. Today, John will be talking about a high quality educator workforce through state policies that we'll focus on today. Okay, and with that, I will pass the mic to Krista to kick us off.
Hi, everyone, and thank you, Angie, for that lovely introduction. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right, can folks see my screen okay?
Yes.
Right. Awesome, thank you. All right, so we're going to be talking about the teacher shortage and using data. So today's webinar, we're also going to be talking about the important role of diverse teachers and how they positively impact student outcomes. Teachers of color are essential in improving the educational experience for students of color and those from lower income families. We know that studies have shown that teachers of color help close the achievement gap for all students and are especially good at connecting with students who come from similar backgrounds. A striking statistic shows the power of Black teachers in particular. Black students who have at least one Black teacher in their early school years are 13% more likely to finish high school and 19% more likely to attend college than their peers who did not have a Black teacher. We also know that teachers of color do more than help with academics. They act as role models, increase how much students engage in school, and help lower the dropout rates among students of color. So understanding our teacher workforce in depth requires access to comprehensive data. Currently, we only have updated statewide percentages for each racial group among teachers. But as many of us know, California's diversity varies greatly from county to county, district to district, and even from one school to another. To truly understand the nuances of our teacher workforce, we need updated teacher demographic data at the school, district, and county levels. Unfortunately, our most recent detailed data is from the 2018 to 19 school year, nearly 6 years ago. And we all know how much the world has changed since then. And so without current data on teacher demographics, we're effectively left in the dark about our teacher workforce. Over the last decade, we've seen both our student and teacher populations grow increasingly diverse. Breaking it down further, we see that Latinx students make up over half of our student body at 56%, with white students at 20% and Asian students at 10%. On the other hand, our teaching staff is predominantly white at 56%, with Latinx teachers representing 25% and Asian teachers making up 8%. The percentage of teachers of color has risen by 8 percentage points, from 30 to 38%, while the percentage of students of color has increased by 4 percentage points, from 74% to 78% since 2013. While the increased percentage of teachers of color is promising, we estimate that if current trends persist, it will take over 150 years for the percent of teachers of color to match the percent of students of color in the state. Given the crucial role that teachers of color play, we would hope our teaching workforce would reflect the rich diversity of our student population. But unfortunately, this is not the reality. Across the state, while students of color represent nearly 80% of the student body, less than 40% of teachers are people of color. Now, in order to understand the match between teachers and students of color better, we created an analysis that divided the percent of teachers of a given race by the percent of students of that same given race for each district in the state to create what we call a representation index. Then, using that representation index, we categorize the districts as either significantly underrepresented, underrepresented, represented, overrepresented, or significantly overrepresented. So to simplify this, we can think of a district that has equal percentage of Latinx teachers and students as having Latinx representation. Conversely, a district that has half the percentage of Latinx teachers as students would be significantly underrepresented. And another note, we only included districts where there were students for each racial category. And if you'd like more information, you can see the appendix at the end of the slide deck. So again, one major data limitation we have is that we don't have recent district level data on teacher demographics. So the data that we are showing is using 2018-19 teacher and student demographics. So in 2018-19, we found that compared to their student populations, Latinx teachers are underrepresented at more than 95% of school districts. So out of the 969 districts that have Latinx students, only 46 districts have representation or more for their Latinx students. Similarly, we found that in that 2018-19 school year, compared to their student populations, Black teachers are underrepresented at more than 74% of school districts. So that's only 107 districts out of the 820 total that have Black students that have representation or more for their Black students. In contrast, white teachers are underrepresented at less than 2% of school districts and overrepresented at 87% of districts. So that means that of the 972 districts with white students, only 21 of them did not have proportional percents of white teachers. So now we can transition to thinking about access to fully prepared and experienced teachers. So thinking back to how Melissa framed us in the beginning, We believe that teacher quality is composed of both access to experienced teachers and then also a diverse teacher workforce. And we also know that research tells us that teachers are the most critical in-school factor that affects student outcomes. Our colleagues at Public Advocates, among others, had led a years-long advocacy effort to ensure that we have the necessary data to verify that all of California's students receive education from well-prepared and properly placed teachers. As Melissa alluded to, in 2022, the California Department of Education released that TAMO, or Teaching Assignment Monitoring Outcomes dataset, which has been instrumental in assessing teacher preparedness and placement throughout the state. However, access to fully prepared, experienced, and correctly placed teachers is uneven across different student groups. By analyzing the TAMO dataset alongside student demographic data, we discovered that schools with high concentrations of Black, Latinx, low-income, and English learner students have less access to fully credentialed and experienced teachers. Specifically, we found that schools with the highest percentage of Black students have 6 percentage points fewer fully prepared and properly placed teachers compared to schools with the fewest. And this is also true for schools serving the most low-income students. We also found that low-income students are 3 times more likely to be taught by intern teachers who are still in the process of earning their teaching credential. They're also nearly twice as likely to have an ineffective teacher, which is someone who lacks the credentials or permits to teach their assigned class. And lastly, we found that Black students are 6 percentage points more likely to attend schools with a high percentage of novice teachers. Right. So now that we've seen some examples of different analyses that we can run using the data that we have, let's talk about what would success look like when it comes to educator data. So throughout this presentation, we've highlighted the crucial need for up-to-date data and comprehensive data on teacher demographics and assignments. Our first request is for the California Department of Education, or CDE, to commit to an annual release of teacher demographic data at the school, district, and county levels. This will significantly enhance our ability and understanding and ability to address disparities in teacher distribution. We also urge the CDE to continue the annual release of that TAMO dataset, which is invaluable in assessing the alignment of teacher placements with their qualifications across the state. And we also need the Commission on Teacher Credentialing, or CTC, to provide transparent data on the demographics of candidates completing teacher preparation programs. This will help us understand who is entering the teaching profession and their pathways through those programs. And lastly, the Cradle to Career Initiative, or C2C, is developing a teacher training and retention dashboard that promises to be a crucial tool for connecting various data points across the educator pipeline. While this is a significant step forward, we must continue to expand the data collected and included in this initiative to fully grasp the journey of a student becoming a teacher. So with all these points made, I'll now pass the discussion to Dr. Kai Matthews, who'll talk about pathways into teaching.
Thank you, Krista, and also thank you in advance for advancing my slides. So I'm going to be talking about creating more pathways into teaching, and I'm going to be honing in on one pathway in particular. I think when we talk about increasing the diversity of the teacher pipeline, one of the main aspects is accessibility. How do we not only attract diverse teachers into the profession, but how accessible are the resources, education, and placement for teachers? And so I'm specifically going to look at community colleges and community college pathways. If you can turn to the next slide. So as many of us on this call know, our community college system is in California in particular is one of the largest institutions of higher education in the country. with over, I think over 150 some odd community colleges. The accessibility of these educational pathways are easier for a lot of diverse students, rural students, low-income students to access versus our four-year university pathways. 60% of CSU students start at a community college already. Our community college pathways are also responsible for over 80% of our early childhood educators. Our community colleges, they support local first generation students who really identify as the global majority. And so the network is very vast and it's more accessible to students, not just physically in physical distance. There's more community colleges in places where there aren't four-year institutions. But financially, we know that per credit, community colleges are substantially cheaper for students to access. And then also the flexibility that community colleges offer in terms of available classes. Many of our state programs currently are impacted. And so community colleges step up in a way that that bigger institutions might not have the ability to. Next slide, please. I'm doing a little, providing some information on just a case study really of how this transpires or how a community college will get involved in a K-12 teaching educator pathway. And this case study involves Cerritos Community College, their teacher track program, which I believe this year is celebrating 25 years in existence. So it's a long-standing program. One of the significant barriers of, besides policy, preventing some community colleges from offering, all community colleges from offering credentialing, it's also just the partnerships that have to be built. And some of those bridges were on curriculum, pedagogy, student acquisition. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how the directors at Cerritos College managed to do this with not only their K-12 partners, but also their four-year university partners. So they started early and with boots on the ground, started helping their schools in Long Beach Unified School District help establish a high school program for students who would be interested in teaching. It started out very small, doing smaller tasks such as being an intern for the teacher or a teacher's aide. They held parent nights to help inform parents about what this track was, what are the benefits of the profession, and really trying to get parents on board and recognizing the potential of having a teacher track at not only the school, but their students being involved. They sent community college counselors, so from the college, from Cerritos to the schools to review students' transcripts, to talk to them about the program, to let them know what would be beneficial in terms of what they take in their classes during senior and junior year. They implemented a dual enrollment program for those students who were interested so that they can still take classes while they were still in high school and be graduating with some credits already towards their degree. They also brought interested students to campus to tour the space and meet faculty, not only that they would have at the community college, but that they would have once they transferred to the four-year university, which in this case was Long Beach State University. And some of these kids have not even been to an institution of higher education. And so just the community that they're building around these particular students, getting them invested early on and engaged early on in the profession, giving them materials and resources and added support into how to go through the track, what they would need on their transcripts, how to even take the test. They hosted teaching assessment and standard subject workshops for high school students. Again, getting that early engagement into the profession and into the pipeline. Next slide, please. So what they did for their university partners was really a collaborative effort. So they coordinated professional development for all faculty, for the community college faculty, and for the faculty who would be teaching at the university level. They had MOUs and transfer agreements in place for those students who went through their 2-year community college program to also transfer in as a junior into the liberal arts studies program at Long Beach State. They had a collaborative curriculum build, which took months of time and energy and meeting to make sure that the units that were being taken at the community college matched and were offered as a prerequisite for the courses that would be required for their credential at the university. And when we're talking about solutions in general, the thing about community colleges is that they're already in place. We already have a physical structure there that can implement and to deliver these types of education to broaden our impact. And there's varying degrees of what we can implement to have varying degrees of impact. So if we're looking for more disruptive change, and this would be at the lowest level, we could institutionalize teacher preparation programs at community colleges through state funding and policy. Currently now, they don't have permanent and consistent funding in the general budget for teacher preparation programs at community colleges. So doing this would be one step into ensuring that these programs can at least be provided at the community college, that there is resources for teachers to partner with K-12 schools and also university partners without having to worry about that funding going away in a couple of years. A more radical change could be allowing community college to grant credentials for at least second career folks. These are people who already have bachelor's degrees, who may have a degree in engineering or math, and also may have already worked in the field, but are retiring or looking for a switch. Having access to a credentialing program at a community college, again, opens up accessibility for more people to enter into the pipeline. And if we're looking for a transformative change, this would look something like implementing a statewide 2-2 program, 2 years at a community college, 2 years at a CSU or another state school. This would trigger having something created that's a universal transferable AA in teaching to any state school. I say CSU because they're by far the largest providers of credentials for California teachers. And then with the 2-2 program, students would be able to graduate with a bachelor's and a credential in 4 and/or 5 years. And I know for this has been talked about on the outskirts a little bit, implementing this, and there's been some contention around whether or not community colleges can pull the weight of offering a teaching credential and also ensure that our teachers are subject matter trained. But I think if this is a solution that we fully go into and the state backs, there can be some real growth and development and creativity around how we shift the teaching credential pipeline, not only in accessibility in the physical structure and where we go to get that credential, but also in the ways in which we're taught and how we're taught subject matter competency for application and for transfer of knowledge. Additional pathway considerations, like I said before, obviously community college pathways is not the only thing that's out there and is not as high profile as some of the other ones that are being put online at the moment. Residency programs are growing and are beneficial for attracting diverse candidates because of the paid student teaching feature that's within them. Classified school employee teacher credential program that California has instituted is also a way to get diverse individuals who are already working at schools into the pipeline and into the profession. Military and college athlete pathways. We know that folks who are in ROP programs and who are in college athletic programs possess a lot of the skills that we look for in future teachers in terms of leadership, creative group work, and building teams. And building relationships. And so making more concerted efforts to target these populations and these programs to recruit students who are coming out of the military and or are ending their college athletic career. And then again, as I mentioned, second career pathways, which are not common currently. And with that, I will pass it to John.
Great, thank you, Kai, and thanks for the intro, Angie. While I'm not able to come to you today from Croatia, at least you can visit Croatia in my background while I'm presenting here. I'm going to try to share my slide here. There you are. All right, can folks see the slide deck?
Yes, it's up.
Awesome. So state policies to develop a diverse and high quality educator workforce. What can the state do? I mean, Tony Thurman has reported in a blog a couple months ago, 10,000 teacher vacancies last year. There is a shortage, and it's particularly acute in our highest need schools. Is it just here forever? No, we can do things. The state can do things and has a responsibility to do things that enact policies that will attract and retain high quality teachers and diverse teachers in our workforce. So we're going to go over a couple things that the state is doing and could do more of, and a couple things they're not doing that they should be doing and should definitely explore. So first off, the state could streamline requirements for teacher certification. There are some arbitrary and highly discriminatory requirements that we should streamline. First off, the California Basic Educational Skills Test, CBEST, has been in place for almost 40 years. It fails a lot of people and a lot of people of color. 78% white pass rate, 48% Black pass rate, 54% Latino pass rate. We have looked deeply into this. We're happy to provide more information about it, but the way that of course, teachers need basic skills, and a bachelor's degree should be enough to get you there. To demonstrate you have college level reading, writing, math skills. The way that the passing scores were set were rejected 285 educator recommendations of where it should be set and went with a much higher politically established pass score, which is not valid and leading to testing the appropriate amount of basic skills needed to be an effective teacher. So we should just have the BA substitute for the basic skills requirement. We have a CSET, which is about subject matter competency. And similarly, there isn't a waiver requirement where you can take certain courses to waive out of that, but not enough people are using it, just really a trickle a year. And we need to improve that alternative waiver requirement by having a broader understanding of what the content is that can address the waiver subject matter and get more institutes of higher ed to use that transcript review to waive requirements. The passage rates or failure rates are similar on the CSET. And the good news is both of these solutions are in the state budget this year, and hopefully are on their way to being passed in June and will come into effect in July. So that could do a fair amount to unstick some sticky barriers. Next, I want to talk about pathways, which is what Kai was addressing, some really important ones. The first three things are things the state is doing, and the next three are things they could be doing. The Golden State Teacher Grant Program gives up to $20,000 a year to support candidates going through the teacher training process. It's been very successful. It's very popular. It might get cut. No, we got to keep that. Residency programs that Kai talked about. Residency programs are like a medical residency where the candidate spends a year in a classroom with a master teacher. They're not doing the surgery. They're learning from a master. And then in their second year, they become the teacher of record and get a full credential and a master's degree. And they now get paid up to $20,000 a year stipend or more even while they're going through the residency program. So they're expensive, but they're popular. The good news is residencies, 69% of residents are teachers of color, and much higher retention rates for people who go through the residency programs. It's a really high quality solution, and we should be doing more of that. The state has put in about $670 million over the last couple of years in these programs. We shouldn't be cutting those. We should be keeping those and expanding. And I went backwards. Grow your own. This is the sort of the classified program that Kai was talking about. There are plenty of folks in the school community, paraprofessional aides, bus drivers, custodians, who with a little support could get a bachelor's degree and take one of those pathways that Kai is building and get into get a credential and a BA and they tend to come back to the district where they were working and stay. What we're not doing, but hopefully we'll be doing soon, apprenticeship programs. There is new money coming from the Federal Department of Labor, and that now include education as a type of pathway that can be supported through apprenticeship. And why we have an ideal pathway here in California, it's called a residency program. Let's use some of that federal labor money to expand our residency programs. The state is just starting to explore that. And hopefully that will be up and running, or at least some of those, within a couple of years. Loan forgiveness. California used to have this tremendous program called the Apple program, loan forgiveness, where you get loan forgiveness while you're teaching. Or how about even better, free tuition? What if we had a program that gave first generation college students free tuition? And I can tell you that some of the best programs in other countries that have the strongest workforces, like Finland, they have free tuition for all of their teacher education programs. They're very competitive. They get very high quality candidates who stay a long time in the profession. So we should be doing that. And what we do know, the research shows that the ethnic group that has the most debt among teacher candidates are Black candidates, because this country is not allowed wealth to accumulate in the Black community. So when we have loan forgiveness and free tuition kinds of programs, we are disproportionately going to be benefiting teachers of color, particularly those that come from the Black community. Funding for student teachers. Like I was talking about those high school teachers who could be teacher aides, and we could start to get in the pipeline for the future. We should pay them. We should give districts money to pay for teacher helpers in high school and get them. And for the student teachers that are actually in preparation programs, they don't currently get paid, even though they are helping the district. We should be paying them. There was a bill to do so, and last year it didn't make it out of committee, but that should be brought back. As I mentioned, a number of these programs are on potentially being discussed about as being on the cutting board this year, and hopefully that won't happen, and that we continue our investments. That would be the worst time to cut these programs. But what's the big elephant in the room? Better pay, better compensation for teachers. Kai's organization down there at UCLA did a very extensive survey in the last year or so. Better pay is the top factor. 76% said that would keep them in the profession longer, more than any other factor. So how do we get to better pay for our teachers? Well, we start with updating the minimum beginning teacher salary legislation. California passed minimum beginning teacher salary in 2000, and it did raise salaries across the state. At that time, $32,000. Well, that was 24 years ago. We need a higher level beginning teacher salary. The current average across the state's 46,000. Many districts, though, have much lower than that, above 32, but not even near 46. New Mexico, a much lower cost of living state, recently passed a $50,000 beginning teacher salary. We ought to do that here. I mean, we at least got to keep up with New Mexico, right? Alabama, another state, beginning teachers say, come on, what's California doing here? We got to get in the game. Incentives, a block grant, some kind of block grant the state could do when we get some more money back to attract and retain teachers, particularly in high poverty schools that have high concentrations. We know they're going to have high concentrations students of color. What could you do with a block grant? Well, you could establish some of those pathway programs that we talked about, residencies, fund the Grow Your Own program locally. You could also be creative, create more housing supports. Housing is a real need, especially in high-cost urban areas. And in an era of declining enrollment, there are school facilities and buildings and land that could be converted to teacher housing, and it is in many districts. Actually, several districts across the state are building hundreds of units of housing for their educators. And subsidized housing would be a good incentive. Oakland gives rental support to some of its teachers. That could be a nice incentive and attract and retain teachers. How about childcare? On-site childcare in our hardest to staff schools. That would be a nice incentive. I might go and start to become a teacher if I could get childcare for free at my work site. Come on. Transportation is another thing that our community forum recommendations identified as something that would attract and retain teachers. So where's this money going to come from for this kind of block grant incentive? Well, there is money right now in your local control funding formula. For For districts that are concentration districts with 55% or greater high need students, that's low income, EL, foster youth, they're getting a concentration grant. And for schools that are 55% or greater high need students, they're required to spend a good piece of that concentration grant on increasing and improving the staff at that school site. So you could use the LCFF concentration grant for some of these innovative alternative compensations and or pathways. There's also, until September 30th of this year, federal COVID relief grants that can still be encumbered up to this year. And I think that there's still a fair amount of that money out among districts. And then for the long term, of course, we have to increase our school funding overall so we can afford to increase compensation for teachers. I wrote an article a couple of years ago. It's on EdSource website still about the state needs to develop a master plan for education. There are 8 or 9 or 10 commonly recommended revenue increase policy increases that you can go look at. But there are a number, we're the only major oil producing state that doesn't have an extraction tax on oil. We don't tax services in California. Many other states do. The commercial property should be reassessed more frequently. There's lots of ideas of how the state could increase revenue for our public schools, and we need to do that so we can pay our teachers better. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to Angie to open the question and answer period and stop sharing screen.
Thank you, John, Kai, and Krista, for so eloquently laying out some hopeful and visionary solutions. I'm going to ask maybe 2 questions, and then I'm going to open it up to the audience to just for time. So first question was originally intended for Krista. So we'll start with Krista, but please feel free to add Kai and John. Krista, you said that at this rate of small and steady growth in terms of our teacher diversity, reaching representation with our student diversity, we would get there in the year 2174, 150 years from now, at this rate. So wondering if you could talk to, first of all, what are other forms of representation that we might look at in addition to racial and ethnic representation, or other forms of diversity that we want to also see reflected in our pipeline? But also, what are those of what's kind of been presented today? What are those race-conscious strategies that will really accelerate the pace at which we are supporting teacher candidates of color to successfully be teachers?
Yeah, thank you, Angie. So I think definitely in addition to that racial and ethnic matching, we also really need linguistic matching as well. We know that California students are super linguistically diverse. I forget the exact number of languages spoken in California schools by students, but I am sure it's well over 100. So having that linguistic match in our teacher workforce is crucial for our English learners and multilingual learners as well. I think another important factor in getting a more diverse teacher workforce is teacher retention. And so thinking about how our administrators, principals, and school leaders all play such a crucial role in teacher retention, and how we have a huge dearth of administrators of color as well. So different initiatives. I know that the Diversity Leadership Institute in LA is doing some great work in building out pathways for diverse administrator candidates. And that is just truly transformative in that it helps create a culturally affirmative and anti-racist school culture and encourages teachers of color to state at their school. We'll love to hear from other folks too.
Yeah. Kai, John, any reactions or additions? Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I was doing the teacher pause, you know, the long time. I was just gonna say, yeah, you know, I really wanted to kind of like double tap what John was saying around these additional resources that we could be providing teachers in order to make it more attractive and also just more sustainable of a profession. And I mean, the housing is such a huge piece. And I sit on the board and actually am interim executive director over a program called Urban Ed Academy, and they recruit Black males from HBCUs, provide them with subsidized housing all in the Bay, which is one of, you know, is the target area where teachers of color are like being visibly forced out of the area because of housing prices. And housing prices not matching with their salary. So subsidized housing for 4 years, support with the transfer process, job placement. These things actually matter and have significant impact on teachers not only feeling supported, but also being able to maintain through the ups and downs of the career. So just wanting to uplift that.
Thank you, Kai. There was another question asked by someone who registered specific to the Black experience and how if there's any research on the connection between the Black experience and education process students and the number of Black individuals that go into education as a profession. I don't know if there's research on that or anything, data or anecdotal that anyone would like to share.
I think I can go back to the statistic I shared in the beginning of my section, where that, you know, Black students who have at least one Black teacher in their early school years are 13% more likely to finish high school and 19% more likely to attend college than their peers who don't have a Black teacher. I think that really speaks to like the huge like role that Black teachers play, especially for their Black students. And we know from the data that there's so many schools that don't have Black teachers for their Black students. So I think just thinking about that, how that cycle kind of continues, where it's if a Black student doesn't have a adult role model like in a teacher that they can see and they can see themselves in that profession in that way. And we know that our schools are systemically like designed basically to not support our students of color and especially not our Black students. That is just like a horrible cycle that keeps feeding in. And it's very difficult for them to matriculate through even a teacher preparation program and feel supported. And to John's point too, about how we know that Black folks have the highest rates of debt. That's like a huge like expense also incurred to go into a profession that is historically underpaid and absolutely not sustainable, especially in places like the Bay Area.
Okay. I think because we're close to the end of our time, I'm gonna stop my own questions and see if there's anyone who would like to raise their hand and ask a question directly. I think the questions in the chat have been answered in the chat. But yeah, I welcome you to come off mute, raise your hand if you have a question for our policy roundtable. And maybe while someone is preparing to come off mute, I can ask another one. John and Kai, you both talked about, well, Kai, you talked about making teaching accessible. And one thing that I heard recently was, you know, teaching is hard. So the preparation to be a teacher is going to be hard. Can Can you speak to that a bit in terms of requirements and if there's improvements to be made there? And also there was a question from an audience member who registered around the training to be culturally and linguistically competent.
Yeah, I'll take the latter part of that question. I'll leave the former part to John, I think. But I the culturally competent and linguistically competent is a question and also a topic that we've been looking at quite a bit actually. I'm in Atlanta right now to present on some data that from the same survey that John was referencing that we did a couple of years ago. It was a statewide survey with around 4,600 teachers. And one of the critical questions that was being asked was, what could have better prepared you for the realities of the teaching profession? And what we got was really an array of, and also some surprising feedback on things around classroom management. So being able to be trauma informed, practical discipline that's also restorative instead of sending kids out. What do de-escalation tactics look like? But then also all of the things that we're asking teachers to be and do in classrooms. That also needs to be taught in our teacher preparation programs. So things like equitable grading, giving empathetic feedback, making phone calls home that are non-combative, that are care informed and care centered. How do I handle being equitable and culturally sustaining in an IEP? When I have to do referrals, what does exemplar paperwork look like? What happens when I have compassion fatigue? So these are all practical things that we know the teachers go through. Teaching is hard, but being able to know that and then plan for it in the ways that we train teachers and preparing them for the school and for the classroom life, I think is something that hasn't transferred yet into our curriculum and pedagogy and teacher credentialing programs across the state. We'll get one or two there that are focused on culturally sustaining pedagogies, but it's not the center of the work, where I think now in a post-pandemic reality, it needs to be something that is actually embedded embedded and written into policy into a lot of our teacher preparation programs.
So somewhat standardizing those skills and then supporting our teacher prep to provide support to our teacher candidates. Thank you, Kai. John, do you want to speak to some of the other, the path to becoming a teacher in addition to what you already shared around basic skill and subject matter competence? How hard is it to be a teacher, to become a teacher?
Yeah. The California teacher path probably has way more steps to it, process and procedures than your typical profession. I mean, you want to be a lawyer like me, you get a BA, you get a grad degree, you take a test. It's not necessarily an easy test, but you're a lawyer and you can practice criminal law, constitutional law, real estate, trust with that same test, right? Well, like a teacher, no, there's a different test. You want to teach Spanish, you want to teach in the elementary school, you want to teach history. There are different tests and pathways. Oh, and by the way, you got to take this reading test. Oh, and you got to take your teaching performance assessments. So there are many steps, but the basic, in addition to those sort of certification exams and steps, you need a BA, you need what's been called the 5th year teacher preparation program, where you learn the BA, you get the subject matter, the prep program, you get the the pedagogy, how you teach a subject. Now, the kind of thing that Kai was talking about, and we have started to do that, is blend those two pieces together. So in 4 years, you could get a BA, you could have your pedagogy, and hopefully your student teaching, hopefully your paid student teaching will be in there as well. So, you know, we do need to have like a holistic assessment and make sure that we have the right entry level requirements, but that we're not doubling down on it. And frankly, I think it's very attractive for politicians to double down on, like, I did this for teachers, I added a reading test, or I added this test. And every time you do that, you are creating more barriers for the profession. So we got to be smart.
Thank you, John. Robust and accessible. Okay, well, if there are any last questions, please feel free to email us, and someone's going to put a couple email addresses in the chat. Since we are out of time for Q&A, I'm going to do a quick wrap up and share with you some other learning opportunities that are coming up as we close out. So I think, Krista, you mentioned almost all of these. Demographic data coming out this year, new cradle to career dashboard on teacher training and retention. Here we have also, there's a new teacher quality indicator that was just published in our California School Dashboard in December. And so every year now you'll see when you go on your school, on your district actually, school that's coming in and hopefully soon, and you can pull up the teaching assignment monitoring data there, as well as on DataQuest. Any follow-up questions, please email us. And then there's a bunch of research coming out in the next few months. CTS is publishing a paper on barriers to racial equity for teachers of color, like next month, really soon. There's also a bill, Senate Bill 1391, that would increase data collection on some of the grant programs that John talked about today, so we can learn more from them. The Commission on Teacher Credentialing has been talking about forming a study group to talk about what we were just discussing, which is how to have a balanced approach to teacher preparation and the requirements. Also, there's going to be a report published by Learning Policy Institute on successful teacher residencies. Look out for that in the next coming months. I believe it's a series. And then finally, EdTrust West is coming out with a research brief on educator diversity this year. Really, right around the corner, a couple more webinars. The California Partnership for the Future of Learning is having a shared learning session May 9th. I believe that link is going to be dropped in the chat for you to register. Another opportunity to learn about teacher residencies and other innovative things to support our teacher pipeline. And then don't forget about us this fall, come back. We'll be addressing the solutions that we can support at the local level to strengthen a diverse and prepared teacher pipeline. So in the last minute, do we have a minute? Yes, please take a minute and take this feedback survey that you should have just seen pop up on your screen. We really appreciate the time that you devoted to this today and in the future. I hope that we continue this learning community, and just want to thank you and say we'll see you again. And in the last minute, we're going to play some music, and you can fill out the survey. And thank you so much to all of our presenters, Kai, Krista, John, for sharing this information today and this learning opportunity.